67 years. That is how long it took me to fully understand the difference between patience and passivity. Most of my life I confused them. I thought sitting still while someone hurt you was a kind of dignity. I was wrong about that. Sitting still while someone hurts you is just sitting still. What I learned in the 14 months before everything ended was that patience, real patience, the kind that earns something, is not silence. It is preparation. My name is Jonathan McCarthy. I lived past tense in a cream-colored colonial on Burwood Lane in Naperville, Illinois. Good neighborhood, the kind where people wave from driveways with the practiced warmth of people who want to be considered friendly without the inconvenience of actually being friends. I had a wife named Paula. I had a business. I had a life that looked from the outside like something a man should be satisfied with. I was not satisfied, but I was patient. And patience, when applied correctly, is the most effective thing a 67-year-old man can do. Welcome to Dad's True Emotions. Everything I am about to tell you is real. It happened over the course of 14 months, and it ended on a Tuesday night in October with a bowl of chicken soup going cold on my kitchen table. Stay with me because this story has a long fuse and the explosion is worth every second of it. Subscribe if you have not and leave a comment when you are done. You belong here. Paula had been ignoring my calls since 9 in the morning. I want you to sit with that detail before we go anywhere else. Not one missed call. Not a dropped connection. Not a dead phone battery. A full day, 9 hours, of a wife who had decided that her husband's calls were something she could simply choose not to answer. When she walked through the front door at 11 o'clock that night, she smelled like expensive hotel soap and something much cheaper underneath it. And she looked at me across the kitchen table with an expression I had seen on other people's faces before, but never on hers. She looked like someone who had just won a round of something and wanted to make sure I knew the score. I was finishing a bowl of chicken soup, homemade from scratch. I had made it myself. She leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed and that smile spreading across her face, slow and deliberate, and she said, "You know what happened today, Jonathan?" Not a question. A statement delivered like a speech she had composed and practiced on the drive home. She told me she had a one-night stand with Craig Hendricks, her boss. And she said, with a composure that told me she had rehearsed even the pause before the last part, she would do it again. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog said something twice and gave up on it. I picked up my spoon. I told her the soup was getting cold. Here is what Paula had expected. Tears were a possibility. Shouting was a certainty in her model. Plates, doors, some grand performance of devastation that would confirm to her that 31 years of marriage still gave her access to the switch. She had wanted to see me come apart. She had stood in that doorway rehearsing the detonation. What she got was a 67-year-old man eating soup. The confusion that crossed her face in the 3 seconds after I picked up that spoon was, I will admit, the best thing I had seen all week. She said that was it. She said she had just told me she slept with Craig Hendricks and I was eating soup. I told her it was good soup. She made a sound, half laughter and half something worse than laughter, and went upstairs. I sat there for 20 more minutes, finished the bowl, washed it, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet in its correct position because I have always been precise about where things belong. Then I went out to the garage, sat in the truck, and allowed myself exactly 4 minutes to feel everything I was not going to feel in front of her. 4 minutes. After that, it was logistics. Let me tell you about Craig Hendricks. Craig was 51, recently divorced, the kind of man who wore fitted blazers on casual Fridays and called everyone chief while looking past them at whoever was more important in the room. He had hired Paula 8 years ago as operations manager at Hendricks Logistics, a mid-size freight brokerage about 12 minutes from our house. She had been good at the job, genuinely good. Sharp, methodical, the kind of person who could smile at you warmly while filing away your vulnerabilities for future reference. I had always admired that about her. In hindsight, I should have been more cautious about what she was filing. She had not needed to take that job. Our business, McCarthy and Associates Property Management, which we had built together starting in 2003 from my construction background and her operations instincts, had 42 active units under contract at its peak. A reputation that produced referrals without advertising. It was ours on paper equally. She had said she wanted something larger, a chance to try something new. I had respected that. Handed her daily responsibilities to a manager, told her to go build something for herself. She did, just not what I had imagined. What Paula did not know, what I had spent 14 months making absolutely certain she would not know, was what had been quietly happening with the business she thought she still co-owned. 14 months before that Tuesday night with the soup, I had sat down with my attorney Christine Knight, a sharp and mercifully unsentimental woman on Washington Street in downtown Naperville, and I had begun a restructuring of McCarthy and Associates so methodical and so carefully documented that Christine had described it, when we finished, as the cleanest work she had done in 22 years of practice. I do not say that to congratulate myself. I say it because my father taught me to measure twice and cut once, and I had been measuring for a very long time. It started with a lunch. My oldest friend Dave Kowalski, who I had worked construction alongside in our 30s, and who had earned the right to say whatever he thought directly to my face through enough Chicago winters to count as a formal credential, met me at a pub on Jefferson Avenue in August of the year before all this. I told him what I suspected. He asked if she was stepping out. I said I did not know if it was a person yet, but that she had been somewhere else for a long time. The new laugh she only used on her phone, the late nights that did not match any schedule I could account for, the particular quality of silence she had developed, which was not the silence of a woman at peace, but the silence of a woman who had stopped being fully present. Dave put his Reuben sandwich down and looked at me seriously, which he does maybe twice a decade, and asked how long I had been thinking about it. Long enough, I told him, to stop being emotional about it. He did not know then what I meant by that. He would. The man I hired to confirm what I suspected was named Eddie Marsh, a semi-retired private investigator who operated above a dry cleaner on Chicago Avenue. Dave had referred me to him years ago for a tenant background check situation. I contacted Eddie the same week I first called Christine. What Eddie found over the following months was not one thing. It was a pattern. The affair with Craig Hendricks had not started recently. It had been running for 4.5 years. And then there was the other matter. Something Eddie flagged while pulling financial records as a routine part of his work. Payments from our business, McCarthy and Associates, to a vendor called Apex Property Consulting. Invoices that appeared legitimate at first pass, but corresponded to no services that had actually been rendered. Over 4 years, $63,000 had passed through this arrangement. Paula had administered every payment from the operations side. She had been stealing from our company, which meant she had been stealing from herself too. That detail told me something significant about how certain she had been that I would never look. For 4 years she had been right. But 14 months before that Tuesday night, I had started looking, and I could not stop. Christine handled the restructuring with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was at stake and had no patience for imprecision. The operating entity, the one that held every active contract, every client relationship, every piece of equipment, and every account that represented 31 years of my work, was reorganized under a new LLC. Paula remained listed as co-owner of the original shell company. The shell was pristine. 3 clients, a storage unit, and a checking account with $400 in it. The new entity had everything else. She had been co-owner of a shell for 6 months and had come home every evening with no idea. The joint household account, the one she used for groceries and her regular appointments at the nail salon on Route 59, had a balance as of the Monday morning before her confession that required a comma to write out, except the comma came right after 0. I had moved everything to a separate account at a different institution the previous Friday afternoon with the unhurried efficiency of a man settling a utility bill. I left 14 cents in the joint account. Christine had raised an eyebrow about the 14 cents. I told her it was a matter of personal expression. After I came back inside from the garage that Tuesday night, the house was dark and quiet upstairs. Paula had gone to sleep. The breezy confidence of a woman who believed Wednesday would look very much like Tuesday. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the cream-colored cabinets and the subway tile backsplash we had argued about for 3 weeks in 2015, and the hook by the back door where my keys had hung every evening for 19 years. Then I went to the hall closet. I had packed 3 bags 4 days earlier. My clothes, every original document, every record, everything with my name on it, and wrapped carefully in 2 layers of moving blankets my mother's portrait. A small oil painting of Mary McCarthy done in 1974 by a local artist. The only thing in that house that could not be replaced by money or time. She was coming with me. She always was going to be. 3 quiet trips to the truck. At 12:17 Wednesday morning, I backed out of the driveway on Burwood Lane for the last time. I did not leave a note. She had given me everything I needed to say at the kitchen door. Dave was parked 1 street over in his truck at my request, watching the front of the house the next morning. He texted me at 7:31 to say the upstairs light had come on. I was 40 minutes away in a corner booth at a Denny's near the interstate, eating eggs I did not taste and watching my phone with the attention of a man waiting for a sequence he had planned to begin executing itself. What I felt that morning was not the hot satisfaction that people imagine when they think about revenge. What I felt was closer to the feeling after surgery. Relieved it was done, exhausted by what it had cost, quietly certain it had been necessary. Dave texted again at 7:44. She had opened the front door, looked up and down the street, gone back inside. At 7:52 she was packing in the kitchen window with her phone. He asked if he should stay. I told him to give it another hour. He sent a coffee cup emoji, which is Dave's way of communicating solidarity without editorializing. The call came at 8:09. I let it ring 4 times. I was finishing toast and I believed in completing what I had started. When I answered, her voice was controlled in the specific way it got during business meetings when something had gone sideways and she needed to appear as though it had not. She asked where I was. I said, "Good morning, Paula." She said, "Don't." She said, "Where were my things?" I told her they were with me. She tried 3 different approaches in the next 40 seconds, all versions of the same argument, which was that 31 years of marriage deserved a conversation. I told her to check the bank account and then call me back. I hung up. I went back to my toast. She did not call back in 5 minutes. She did not call back in 10. I knew what she was doing. Logging into the joint account on her laptop, watching the balance sit where I had left it, telling herself there was an error, calling the automated line, refreshing, trying the savings, refreshing again. Then she would have moved to the business account. The original LLC, $400 and a storage unit on Napier Boulevard. Dave texted at 8:24. She had gotten in her car. I texted Christine, who responded in under a minute saying she had been expecting the message, and that everything was in order. Paula drove to a family law attorney named Gerald Fitch on Ogden Avenue in Downers Grove. 3-star Google rating, a website that appeared to be a decade old, a reputation as the kind of lawyer who compensated for a lack of elegance with volume. She was in his office by 9:15. I know because my daughter Renee, who lives in Evanston and had been quietly briefed 3 weeks prior, drove past the parking lot on her way to work and recognized Paula's car. Renee texted me a photograph and 4 words, "Dad, she moved fast." I texted back too, "So did I." What Gerald Fitch was going to discover when he started pulling records was that the architecture of our business was not what his client believed it to be. The house was in both names, yes. That was a real card she held. But the operating entity of McCarthy and Associates, the one with 41 active property management contracts, the client relationships built across 2 decades, the equipment. The accounts, that entity had never had Paula's name on it. It did not now. The original LLC she co-owned was clean and complete, $400 and a storage unit. I had left the broken coffee maker in the storage unit as well. I am not a monster. Christine called me at 10:03. She confirmed that Fitch had been retained and would come at the business first, which was where he would expect the value to be. She said when he looked, he would find exactly what we had left for him to find. The original LLC was properly documented, structured around legitimate business decisions made 14 months prior, and worth approximately $414 as of that morning. She noted that the 14 cents was a nice touch. I told her it was a matter of principle. She said Fitch would argue dissipation of marital assets. He would claim I had moved money deliberately to deprive Paula of her share. I asked if he could prove it. Christine said he could argue it, but that our documentation attached a legitimate business purpose to every transfer, all of which had been executed well before any legal action was filed or threatened. The paper trail was, she said, pausing in the way she did when she was selecting a word carefully, conservative. I told her I had been a carpenter. We measured twice. I drove back to Naperville at noon. I had taken a room at an extended stay on Deal Road. Modest place, thin walls, a coffee maker bolted to the counter in case anyone considered running off with it. Room 114. I had paid a month in advance in cash. Dave met me there with Italian beef sandwiches from Portillo's, dipped correctly, and sat on the edge of the bed eating while I sat at the desk by the window. He told me Paula had called her sister, who had told her husband, who had called Dave's wife, who had called Dave, asking if he knew where I was. Paula was telling people I had experienced some kind of episode, that I had left in the night without warning, that she was worried about me. She was managing the story. Dave asked me with a kind of careful diplomacy whether I was all right with that. I looked out the window at a maintenance worker losing a battle with the October wind and a pile of leaves. I told Dave that stories have sequels. He put his sandwich down entirely and said he knew I had something else. He has known me 30 years. He can tell. I told him about Eddie Marsh, about the 14 months of documentation, about Apex Property Consulting, about $63,000 in payments over 4 years that corresponded to no actual services. He sat with it quietly. He asked how much. When I told him, the room went very still. He said she had been stealing from the company. I told him she had been stealing from our company, which was an important distinction, because it meant she had also been stealing from herself, which told you something precise about how certain she was that I would never look. For 4 years she had been right. She had not been right for the last 14 months. Dave left at 2. I sat in room 114 watching the parking lot and thinking about nothing and everything in the simultaneous way that becomes available to you when a decision made a long time ago is finally irreversibly in motion. My phone buzzed at 3:47. A number I did not recognize. Chicago area code. The man who called said his name was Tom Greer, that he wrote for the Tribune's business desk, and that he had been looking into irregularities at Hendricks Logistics involving a vendor payment scheme through something called Apex Property Consulting. He understood I might have familiarity with that name. I watched the maintenance worker outside finally abandon the leaves entirely, just standing there holding his machine while the wind did whatever it wanted. I had not contacted Tom Greer. I had not contacted anyone at the Tribune, which meant someone else had, and the number of people who knew about Apex Property Consulting was very short. I did the calculation in the time it took Greer to ask if I was still there. Craig Hendricks, the man who had been conducting a 4-year affair with my wife, had apparently decided that when the water started rising, he preferred to be the one on the lifeboat. He had called the Tribune before he called her. There is a specific quality of justice the universe occasionally delivers that you could not have designed better yourself. I have learned to recognize it and move aside to give it room. I met Greer the following morning at a coffee shop on Washington Street, 2 blocks from Christine's office. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe late 30s, corduroy jacket, the watchful eyes of someone who made his living reading people in the first 30 seconds. He had a recorder on the table before I sat down. I set Eddie Marsh's envelope on the table across from it. I told him I was providing the documents because $63,000 of fraudulent vendor payments had passed through a business with my name on it, and I was not prepared to have my name associated with fraud. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up and asked if Paula knew I had this. I told him no. He asked if she knew I was there. I said she had not known where I was for the past 48 hours. She had been managing her narrative. He almost smiled. He asked when the restructuring of McCarthy and Associates had taken place. I told him 14 months ago, documented and legal and entirely unrelated to any of this. He nodded and slid the envelope back across the table and said he would need certified copies. I told him Christine Knight's office would have them ready by noon. He said I had already called my attorney that morning. I told him I had called my attorney 14 months ago. He picked up his recorder and we got to work. Christine sent me the link 2 mornings later. I read the article sitting on the edge of the bed in room 114 in my undershirt with gas station coffee going cold on the nightstand. Tom Greer had done serious, thorough work. The piece laid out the Apex Property Consulting scheme in full. Fraudulent invoices, wire transfers, a shell vendor with no physical presence and no services on record. Hendricks Logistics was named prominently. Craig Hendricks was named by name. And in the 4th paragraph, with the kind of quiet precision that good reporters use when they want something to land without appearing to throw it, the piece named the operations manager who had administered the payments on the McCarthy and Associates side. Paula Louise McCarthy, her full name, in the Chicago Tribune. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I finished my coffee, got dressed, and called Dave. He answered before I finished dialing. He said Carol was already texting the street. The whole neighborhood knew by 9. Gerald Fitch had dropped her case the previous afternoon, Dave said, citing conflicts of interest. He had been billing Paula to fight over a business that the Tribune had just reported she had been defrauding. He was not just in a losing case. He was standing next to a client who was looking at potential criminal exposure. Even a 3-star lawyer recognizes when the exit is the only move. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later on a January morning in a DuPage County courtroom that smelled like carpet cleaner and institutional patience. Paula had retained new counsel, a younger woman who did competent work but had inherited a case with very little left to argue about. The house sold in 30 days. After the mortgage payoff, Paula walked away with $82,000 and the storage unit on Napier Boulevard. She kept the coffee maker. I kept everything else. Craig Hendricks settled quietly with Hendricks Logistics' internal auditors in December and resigned. Last I heard he was consulting somewhere in Arizona. Good weather for a man putting distance between himself and his reputation. The DuPage County State's attorney opened a preliminary inquiry into the Apex payments in February. Christine told me not to expect rapid movement, but that the file was open and files, in her experience, had a way of staying that way. On the morning the divorce was finalized, I drove back to Burwood Lane one time, not to the house. The new owners had already changed the shutter color to something I would not have chosen. I just parked at the end of the street and sat there for a few minutes. Watched the neighborhood go about its 10 o'clock business. A woman with a dog, a delivery truck, someone's irrigation system running in January, the kind of detail you only notice when you finally have enough stillness to notice things. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the parts that had been good, which existed and deserved to be acknowledged. I thought about the 2 children we had raised in that house who had become people I was genuinely proud of, and who were not responsible for what their mother had chosen. I thought about my mother's portrait, which was now hanging in my new apartment on Eagle Street in downtown Naperville, 3rd floor, big windows facing east, nobody's name on the lease but mine. I thought about a carpenter's son from Joliet who married his college girlfriend and worked hard enough to build something real, and who had spent 14 months making certain that when everything broke, he would be the one standing on solid ground. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be completely honest about that. Triumph was never what I was after. What I felt was the quiet, specific peace of a man who saw something coming, prepared with everything available to him, and did not flinch when the moment arrived. That is a different feeling. It is smaller than Triumph, and it lasts longer, and it costs less than you would think. I put the truck in drive and pulled away from Burwood Lane without looking in the rearview mirror. I had measured twice. I was finished cutting. Whatever comes next is built on ground that actually holds. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Dad's True Emotions. It costs you nothing and it means everything. Thank you for being here.